Hello everyone, here is Afra. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGSE Physics paper 4 theory extended. Paper code is 0625 with variant 41, held on May-June 2020. And time duration is 1 hour 15 minutes. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. An aeroplane of mass 2.5 into 10 to the power 5 kilogram. Mass of aeroplane is given, lands with a speed of 62 meter per second on a horizontal runway at a time t is equal to 0. So, when time t is equal to 0, the speed of aeroplane is 62 meter per second. The aeroplane decelerates uniformly as it travels along the runway in a straight line till it reaches a speed of 6 meter per second at t is equal to 35 seconds. So, after t is equal to 35 seconds, the speed comes 6 meter per second. Part A. Calculate deceleration of the aeroplane in the 35 seconds after it lands. Here we have to find out the deceleration. So first of all, what is meant by deceleration? Deceleration basically is the negative acceleration, or when the speed of body is decreasing with the increasing time. Then we can say that the body is moving with the decreasing speed and it is known as deceleration. So in the given data, we can see that at t is equal to 0. Speed is 62 meter per second. When time reaches to 35 seconds, speed comes to be 6.0 meter per second. This is 6.0. Now we have to find out the deceleration. We know that deceleration is the change in speed per unit time, and we write A is equal to change in speed per change in time Here speed is 62 and 6. So first of all we write 62 minus 6.0 divided by 35 minus 0. It is the time. And then after simplification we get 1.6 meter per second square. So acceleration comes to be 1.6 meter per second square. Here in the question we are asked to find out the deceleration. It means that we have to place the negative sign with the acceleration. So I write here negative, where negative sign shows that the speed of aeroplane is decreasing with time. Part 2. The resultant force acting on the aeroplane as it accelerates. So here we have to find out the resultant force, and we know that here mass is given 2.5 into 10 to the power 5 and we have to find out the deceleration. So I write here the force F is equal to ma, where m is the mass and a is the acceleration. M is given as 2.5 into 10 to the power 5 multiplied by acceleration is given as 1.6. So when I multiply this, I get 4.0 into 10 to the power 5 newtons. So force comes to be 4.0 into 10 to the power 5 newtons. Part 3. the momentum of aeroplane when it passes, when its speed is 6 meter per second. So here we have to find out momentum, and speed is given as 6 meter per second. We know that momentum is the product of mass and speed. So I write momentum P must be equal to product of mass and speed. Mass is given as 2.5 into 10 ki power 5 and speed is 6.0. So I get 1.5 into 10 ki power 6. The unit of momentum is kilogram meter per second. So the momentum comes to be 1.5 into 10 ki power 6 kilogram meter per second. So I write here 1.5 into 10 ki power 6 kilogram meter per second. We also write it as Newton second because the other unit of momentum is Newton second. It's your choice. Part B. At t is equal to 35 seconds, the aeroplane stops decelerating and moves along the runway at a constant speed. Here speed is constant of 6 meter per second, which is 6 meter per second for a further 15 seconds. On figure 1.1, sketch the shape of graph for the distance traveled by the aeroplane along the runway between t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 50 seconds. You don't require to calculate the distance. So here we are asked to draw the graph for time t is equal to 50 seconds. In the part A, first part we have calculated the deceleration, and we see that from 0 second to 35 second the aeroplane is decelerating. That it means that its speed is decreasing. So as we know that the speed is decreasing, and for decreasing speed, when we draw a graph, its curve will be just like this. It shows that speed is changing and gradient is decreasing, which means that the aeroplane is decelerating. So when I draw here, I start from t is equal to 0, where the distance traveled by the aeroplane at time t is equal to 0 meters. So at t is equal to 0 second, the distance is 0, and when time t is equal to 35 seconds, the distance is maximum because speed is decreasing. So when I plot a graph, it will be just like this. Starting from this point, I get curve like this. No. Second part, from at t is equal to 35 seconds, we know that the aeroplane moves with decelerating acceleration. After t is equal to 35 seconds, the aeroplane moves with constant speed, that is 6 meter per second. So between 35 to 50 seconds, the aeroplane has constant speed, and when we draw the graph between distance and time for constant speed, it will be a straight line. So when I draw it, it will be just like this. I use the ruler, this. I have to mention these 50 seconds so that the curve does not cross this line. And then I starting from this point and draw a line just like this. So this line is for constant speed. Moving towards the next part of this question. Part C. As the aeroplane decelerates, the kinetic energy decreases. It means that when the speed of aeroplane decreases, its kinetic energy also decreases, because we know that kinetic energy is equal to 1 over 2 mv square. When speed is decreasing, then its kinetic energy also decreases. Suggest what happened to this energy. So, we know that when aeroplane slows down, its energy decreases. But we don't know whether where this energy go. There will be the generation of thermal energy, and since in the case of aeroplane, the thermal energy must be produced in the brakes or in tires. So I write here thermal energy produced in brakes or in tires. We simply say that this kinetic energy that decreases is converted into the thermal energy. Question number 2. Figure 2.1 is the extension load graph for a light spring S. You can see here is the graph, and on x-axis load is taken, while on y-axis we have taken extension. And extension is measured in centimeter while the load is taken in newtons. So you can see from this curve that from 0 to 8 Newton load, the extension increases as we increases the load, and after 8 Newton the trend changes. You can see from here that at this point it is a straight line. It means that when we increases the load, its corresponding extension also increases. But after 8 Newton load, the trend changes. And part A. State the graph of the load for which S obey Hooke's law. So first of all, we have to know about what is Hooke's law. Hooke's law states as the extension is directly proportional to load, or load is directly proportional to extension. It means that if I increases the load, extension also increases. But if I decreases the load, extension also decreases. It means that there is a direct relationship between the load and extension. Extension here is represented by E, and load I represent it with F. So F is directly proportional to E, and according to Hooke's law, F is equal to Ke, where K is the spring constant and E is the extension and F is the load. Part A. State the range of loads for which S obey the Hooke's law. So we have to tell that in which range this graph shows that Hooke's law is obeyed. So we have to see that at which point the curve is a straight line, or at which point the load increases with the increase in extension. So from 0 to 8 Newton load, the line is a straight. So we simply write here that from 0 to 8 newtons. Part B. Using the information from figure 2.1, determine the spring constant K of the spring S. So here we have to determine the spring constant, and using this formula F is equal to Ke, I can find out the spring constant because extension is given, that is 8, as this formula is applicable for the straight line. So we take the values at which the relation between extension and load is a straight. So for load it is 8 Newton, while its corresponding extension value you can calculate from here is this, and it is at 15. So extension will be 15 centimeter. So I write here F is equal to F over E is equal to K. Put values here. F is equal to 8 newtons over E is 15. So K comes to be 0.53 Newton per centimeter. So the answer will be 0.53 Newton per centimeter. Moving towards the other part of this question. Part C. There is another figure 2.2. A second spring identical to the spring S. No, there are two springs. First spring is this S, while the other is that. Second spring is identical to spring S. It is attached to the spring S. The two springs are attached to the rod, and both of these springs are attached with the rod. This is the rod. As shown in the figure 2.2, a load of 4 newtons. Now here is the load, that's value is 4 newton, is suspended from the bottom of spring S. You can see in the figure that load is attached and it is equal to 4 newton. The arrangement is in equilibrium. Part 1. State the name of the form of energy stored in the two springs when they are stretched. Here we have to tell that which form of energy stored in this spring. As we know that springs can stretch or compress, and the energy stored in them will be elastic potential energy. So I write here elastic potential energy. Part 2. Determine the extension of the arrangement in figure 2.2. Now here we have to determine the extension, and I represent extension with E. In this part we first go to the figure. You have to remember that load is 4 newtons. So from the graph you can see here that when load is 4 newton, this point, its corresponding values of extension will be this, and it is almost at 7.5. So I just write here that when load is 4, extension will be 7.5 centimeter. When load is equal to 4 newton, corresponding extension will be equal to 7.5 centimeter. No, you can see here that these are two springs, and this value of extension is for single spring. When we attach load from this system of spring, both of the spring will extend. That's why I multiply this value of extension with 2, because there are two springs. So 2 multiplied by 7.5, it will be equal to 15 centimeter. So the extension of this system will be equal to 15 centimeter. I write here 15 centimeter. Part 3. The load is carefully increased to 6.0 newton in total. So we have to increase the load to 6.0 newton. Calculate the distance moved by the load to the new equilibrium position as the load increased from 4 Newton to 6 Newton. So here you can see that first load is 4 Newton and then we increase it and it becomes 6 Newton. And we have to calculate the distance that the spring moves. Or simply I can say that we have to find out the extension. So first of all, when load is 4 Newton, then it increased to 6 Newton. So the total increment will be 2 Newtons in load. Then we also know that when load is 4 Newton, the corresponding extension is 15 centimeter. It is load and it is extension. It means that if I decrease the load to 2 Newton, then its extension becomes 7.5 centimeter. Here we are given 2 Newton load because first of all there are 4 Newton and then we increase to 6 Newton. It means that we have increased its value 2 Newton before. So I just write here, when load is 4 Newton, then the extension will be 15 centimeter. But when load is 2 Newton, I divide the extension by 2 and it comes to be 7.5. So the extension in this case, when load is increased from 4 Newton to 6 Newton, is 7.5, which is the answer of this question. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows gas trapped in the sealed end of a tube by a dense liquid. So you can see here is a figure 3.1 and it consists of a tube and inside this tube there is a dense liquid. The scale marked on the sealed end of the tube is calibrated to read the volume of gas trapped above the liquid surface. Figure 3.1 shows that initially the volume V1 of the gas is 60 cubic centimeter. The pressure of the atmosphere is 1.0 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. So initially the pressure is 1.0 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal, which is the atmospheric pressure, and the initial volume is 60 cubic centimeter. You can see from the figure 3.1. Part A. State how figure 3.1 shows that the pressure of trapped gas is equal to the pressure of atmosphere. Here we have to tell that how the pressure of the gas that is trapped inside this liquid must be equal to the atmospheric pressure. So you can see from this figure that the level of liquid on both sides of this tube is equal. I am labeling it. This is the level of liquid on right hand side and it is the level on left hand side, and both of these levels are equal. That's why the pressure of trapped gas must be equal to the pressure of atmosphere. So I write here, because the level of liquid on both sides of tube are same, are equal. Part B. Explain in terms of momentum of its molecule why the trapped gas exert pressure on the walls of tube. So here we have to tell that why the trapped gas exert pressure on the walls of tube. So first of all, if I consider that it is a tube and it contains many molecules just like this, and We know that gas molecules are always in this state of motion. It means that they collide with each other and also collide with the wall of this tube. I suppose that this molecule collide with the wall in this direction and then it bounce back in this direction. It means that when the gas molecule collide with the wall of tube, it changes its direction and bounce back. So when it bounces back, there will be the change in momentum, delta P, and we know that change in momentum is equal to the force. So when there is a change in momentum, it causes the force, and this force will then spread out of the walls of tube, producing the pressure. So I simply write here, gas molecules are in state of motion when they collide with walls of tube. Their direction will be reversed and they bounce back. This will cause a change in momentum. And we know that change in momentum equal to force, and it produces force. This force will spread out on walls of tube, thus producing pressure. So in this case, the trapped gas exerts the pressure on the walls of tube. So moving towards the other part of this question, part C. More of the dense liquid is poured into the open end of the tube. You can see here that this end is open while this end is sealed. This is sealed and it is open. The level of the liquid surface in both the sealed and the open end of the tube is rises as shown in the figure 3.2. The temperature of the trapped gas and atmospheric pressure both remain same. It means that the temperature remains the same. Part first. In the sealed end of the tube, the volume V2 of the trapped gas is 50 cubic centimeter. In the open end of the tube, the liquid surface is 15 centimeter above the new level in the sealed tube. Calculate the pressure P2 of the trapped gas. So first of all, we know that before pouring more liquid into this tube, initially the pressure P1 is equal to atmospheric pressure and it is 1.05 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. And initially volume is equal to 60 cubic centimeter. No, after the tube is poured with some liquid, the volume becomes 50 cubic centimeter. You can see in this figure, volume is 50 cubic centimeter. So I write V2 is equal to 50 cubic centimeter, and we have to calculate the pressure P2. We also know that the temperature remains same, and the process in which temperature remains same is actually the Boyle's law. In the Boyle's law, we write as P2 we have to find out it, and according to Boyle's law, P1 V1 is equal to P2 V2. It means that the product of pressure and volume at constant temperature remains same. And here we have to find out the value of P2. I rearrange this equation. P2 comes to be P1 V1 over V2. So putting here values, it comes to be 1.05 into 10 to the power 5 multiplied by volume first is 60 cubic centimeter, and after volume changes it becomes 50. So I simply write here P2 is equal to 1.2 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. So the volume comes to be 1.2 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. So I write here 1.2 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. Second part, calculate the density of the liquid in the tube. Here we have to calculate the density of the liquid that is inside the tube. First of all, we come on the figure and see that P2 is the pressure of this region, and this pressure is caused by the pressure of this liquid, P liquid, plus the atmospheric pressure. So I can say that P2 is equal to the pressure of liquid plus atmospheric pressure. So I write simply P2 is equal to pressure of liquid plus atmosphere pressure. We have already calculated the P2, and we also know the value of atmospheric pressure. So the pressure of liquid comes to be it will be equal to P2 minus atmospheric pressure. Now I am going to putting the values. P2 is equal to 1.2 into 10 to the power 5 minus 1.05 into 10 to the power 5, and it comes to be 2.0 into 10 to the power 4. No, it is the pressure of liquid and its unit is Pascal. In the part second, we have to calculate the density of liquid, and we know that P is equal to, that is the pressure of liquid. I represent it with PL. It is equal to rho GH. Here rho is the density, PL is pressure of liquid, G, its value is 10 and height is given in the question, which is equal to 15 centimeter. This is given the height. So I simply calculate rho PL over GH. Putting the value here, 2.0 into 10 की power 4 divided by the value of G is 10 multiplied by H is 15 centimeter. G is basically acceleration due to gravity. So after simplification, I write 1.33 into 10 की power 4 kilogram per centimeter cube. So density must be equal to 1.33 into 10 की power 4 kilogram per cubic centimeter. Question number 4. Water has a specific heat capacity of 4200 joule per kilogram per degree C and a boiling point of 100 degrees C. Here boiling point and specific heat capacity of water is given. Part A. State what is meant by boiling point. Here we just have to define the boiling point. Boiling point is the temperature at which liquid changes into gas. So I write here the temperature at which liquid changes into gas. Is called boiling point. Part B. A mass of 0.35 kilogram of water at its boiling point is poured into the copper container, which is initially at 11 degrees C. So the temperature is 11 degrees C. After few seconds, the temperature of container and water are both 95 degrees C. After some time, the temperature of both becomes 95 degrees C. Part 1. Calculate the energy transfer from the water. So here we have to calculate the energy that is transferred from the water. We know that E is equal to mc delta T. Here m is the mass and C is specific heat capacity and delta T is change in temperature for water. You can see in the question that the temperature first is 100 degrees C and then after some time it becomes 95 degrees C. So here we have to find out energy. After putting values, energy comes to be, mass is given as 0.30 multiplied by C is 4200 multiplied by change in temperature, that is 100 minus 95 degrees C. So energy comes to be 6300 joule. So the energy that is transferred from the water is 6300 joule. Part 2. Calculate the thermal capacity of the copper container. Here we have to calculate the thermal capacity and we know that energy is also equal to C delta T. Here this C is the thermal capacity. E is the energy and delta T is change in temperature. So I just write C is equal to E over delta T. Energy we have already calculated, it is equal to 6300 and change in temperature will be equal to, here we have to find out the change in temperature for copper container because we have to find out the thermal capacity of copper container. That's why I take the temperature of copper container, that is initially 11. You can see from here, and after that it becomes 95. So I put these values and it comes to be 95 minus 11. After simplification, thermal capacity becomes 7551. So it is the value of thermal capacity. So I just write here 7551, and the unit of this thermal capacity is joule per degree C. Part 3. Water from the container evaporates and the temperature of remaining water decreases slowly. Explain in terms of molecules why evaporation causes the temperature of remaining water to decrease. Here we have to write the reason that why the evaporation causes the temperature of remaining water to decrease. So, if I consider that this is a tub and there are large number of molecules, some of these molecules has lot of energy while some molecules has small amount of energy. First of all, we have to know what is the process of evaporation. Evaporation is a process in which molecules escape from the surface. It means that when molecules evaporate, first of all, they have attractive forces and they have to do work against these attractive forces that hold them together. In order to do this, it need to carry a lot of energy. Some molecules have large amount of energy and some have very small amount of energy. So the molecules that has lot of energy escape from the surface, and the molecules that has small amount of energy, these are unable to escape from the surface. And because they have less energy, that's why the temperature of the remaining molecules decreases, and in this way the evaporation causes cooling. So I write here molecules do work against attractive forces as they evaporate. Evaporate means when they comes out of the surface. More energetic molecules are likely to escape, while remaining molecules have less energy that's why their temperature decreases. Question number 5. The distance between the center of thin converging lens and each principal focus is 5 cm. Here we are given the distance between the center of converging lens and principal focus. Part A. Describe what is meant by principal focus of thin converging lens. Here we have to define what is the principal focus. Principal focus is the point where the incident rays meet after passing through the lens. So I write here the point where incident parallel rays meet after passing through lens on principal axis. Part B. The lens is used as magnifying glass to produce an image I of an object O. Object is represented by O while the image is represented by I. 1. Underline the terms that describe the nature of image produced by the magnifying glass. So we have to tell that which nature of image is formed by this magnifying glass. And first of all, you can see the figure. Part 2. Figure 5.1 is a full-scale diagram of the lens and image. You can see in the figure that the image is represented by I and its location is also be shown, while the center of lens is represented by this, and there is no tell the location of object or the principal focus, and we know that the magnifying glass forms the image that is larger. First of all, we have to draw the diagram for this magnifying glass, and then we tell that which kind of image is formed by it. So let's move in towards the other part, then at the end we do this part. Part first, on figure 5.1, mark principal focuses and labeled each of them with F. So here we have to mark the principal focus and label them with F. As we know that first the distance between the principal focus and the center of lens is given 5 cm. So we have to mention the principal focus at 5 cm on this lens. So I am going to mention these points. You can see in the figure that the scale is also mentioned, that from this point to this point it is 1 cm. Same on vertical, from this point to this point it is 1 cm. So if I count 5 cm from this point, which is the center of lens, 1 cm comes at this point, it is 1 cm, 2 cm, it is 3 cm, it is 4 cm, and it is 5 cm. So the distance between the center of lens and the principal focus is 5 cm. Therefore I label it with F. On the left side I do the same. First I am marking 1 cm, it is 2 cm, 3 cm, 4 cm, and it is 5 cm. So it is the point F. Part 2. By drawing on figure 5.1, find the position of object O and add object O on the diagram. Here we have to locate the object O, which is given the image and its location. So what we have to do, we draw the rays. First ray that is parallel to the principal axis and passing through focus. It means that I have to draw the rays as, I use the scale, and first of all I draw the ray that passes through the center of this lens. So I draw a line starting from here and passing through the center of lens and this one. Second way is that passing through the focus point. So I draw the ray that passing through the focus point. Starting from this point, I draw the second ray. Now, to locate the position of object, what I have to do? I have to mention this point at which this ray cuts this line and draw a straight line at here. I am going to draw it. And end this line on the first line. You can see that this red line touches the blue line at a point. No, I join this with the x-axis and I get this point. This is the location of object. I label it with O. So this is the object. In the next part, part 3. Using figure 5.1, determine the distance of the object O from the center of lens. Here we have to determine the distance of this object O from the center of lens. So this is the object O and this is the center. So I have to calculate this distance and this. First of all, you can see from here that it 1 centimeter, it is again 1 centimeter and this point is almost at 0.8. So the total distance becomes to be 2.8. It is 2.8 centimeter. So the distance of object from the center of lens is 2.8 centimeter. I write here. centimeter. Now we are moving towards the remaining part of this question. From this diagram, you can see that this is the object and it is the image. We know that in the lenses, the object is on left side while the image formed on the right side. But in this case, the image is also formed on the left side and it is of larger size. You can compare O and I. It means that the image is larger size. It means that it is enlarged and it is not inverted. Inverted image will formed on the right side. If the image is formed at this position with respect to this object O, then it is the inverted. But in our case, the image is formed at this location, so it is not inverted and also it is not real. So you can see that the size of image is larger as compared to size of object. That's why it is not of same size. And it is upright and virtual because the image is formed on the same side as that of object. So it is virtual. Question number 6. The speed of sound in air is 360 meter per second. Part A. Calculate the range of wavelengths for the sounds that are audible by the human ear. So here we have to calculate the range of wavelength. We know that the frequency for the human ranges from 20 Hz to 20 kHz, which is 20,000 Hz. So here the speed of sound is also given. V is equal to 340 meter per second, and we have to calculate the range of wavelengths. So what will we do? We know that V is equal to f lambda. First I consider 20 Hz frequency and then calculate wavelength for it. For f is equal to 20 Hz, I have to calculate lambda. It comes to be V over f. V is given 340 meter per second over 20. In this case, lambda comes to be 17 meters. Now I have to calculate the wavelength for 20,000 Hz. For f is equal to 20,000 Hz. Using the same formula, lambda is equal to V over f, and V is 340 divided by 20,000. Wavelength comes to be 0.017 meter. So, for audible frequency and the speed of sound 340 meter per second, the wavelength ranges from 0.017 meter to 17 meters. Part B. Sound waves are longitudinal waves. Describe how a longitudinal wave differs from the transverse wave. So, here we have to differentiate between the longitudinal and transverse wave. We know that in the longitudinal wave, the direction of vibration is parallel to the direction of energy travel. But in the transverse wave, the direction of vibration of wave is perpendicular to the energy travel direction. If I consider a string, and this is a string, I am holding one end of the string, you can see that the energy is transferred in this direction. But if I move the string up and down, I create vibration in this direction. Then you can see that the direction in which vibration is created is perpendicular to the direction of travel of energy. So both of these are perpendicular, means that the angle between them is 90. It means that this wave is transverse wave. This is transverse wave. But in the case of longitudinal wave, if I consider the same string, and you can see here wave transport energy in this direction, and if I move the string in this direction, left and right, then you can see that the direction of vibration is this, while the direction of energy travel also be this. The angle between them is 0, which means that both of these are parallel to each other, and I can say that this wave is longitudinal wave. So I write here longitudinal wave waves vibration direction is parallel to energy travel direction. While transfer wave vibration direction is perpendicular to energy travel direction. This is the main difference between the longitudinal wave and transverse wave. So there is also a difference between them. The transverse wave will be in this form. And if I consider this is a baseline, the portion of this wave above this baseline is known as crest, while the portion of the wave below this baseline is known as trough. This is for transverse wave. Now for longitudinal wave, this wave travels just like this. At some places these are very far apart from each other, but at some places these are very close to each other. So basically this is for longitudinal wave, and the portion where the waves are far apart from each other, it is known as rarefaction. While the portion where the waves are very close, it is called compression. So, the transverse wave consists of crest and trough, while the longitudinal wave consists of compression and rarefaction. Moving towards the next part of this question. Figure 6.1 shows a band in the front of building. The drum produces a low frequency sound. Other musical instrument produces a high frequency sound. These two sounds are equally loud. A young man at the side of the building hears the drum. He can hear the drum, but not the high frequency sounds from the other musical instruments. It means that this person can hear the sound of low frequency but not the sound of high frequency. Explain why this happens. So, first of all, you can see here that this person is not in the straight line from the source of sound. You can see here that these are the source of sound, and this person is not along this line. It will in this direction, which means that there is a diffraction of sound. And there are two kinds of frequency. First is loud frequency sound and other is high frequency sound. V is equal to F lambda and V remains same. So F is inversely proportional to 1 over lambda. For low frequency sound, wavelength will be larger, but for high frequency sound, the wavelength will be smaller. So in order for the sound to be heard for this person, the sound wave need to be diffract, because you can see here that the sound gets diffraction. When the sound diffract, the lower frequency that is produced by the drum, there will be the greater wavelength by this relation. If the frequency is low, wavelength will be larger. And if the wavelength is greater, there will be more diffraction of sound. So, for the low frequency sound, there is more diffraction of sound, and this person will be able to hear it from distance. But for the high frequency sound, the wavelength will be smaller and it will not diffract, and it was not heard by this person. So I write here drum produce low frequency sound. And wavelength is greater. As compared to high frequency sound. It is because that f is inversely proportional to wavelength. That's why the low frequency sounds produce the higher wavelength. Greater wavelength results in more diffraction of sound from drum. That's why the lower frequency sound can be heard by this man, but not the high frequency sound. Question number 7. An electromagnet consists of a solenoid X that is made up of copper wire. The solenoid contains an iron core. Part A. Explain why. 1. The structure of copper makes it a suitable material for the wire. Here we have to describe the reason why the copper is suitable for the material to make this wire. So, first of all, we have to know about the properties of copper. And copper is a metal. It consists of a lot of free electrons. That's why it is a good electrical conductor. Because of these properties, it is used for a suitable material of this wire. So I write here, copper is a metal. And it contains free electrons. That's why it is a good electrical conductor. It's also a good electrical conductor. Part 2. Iron is a suitable material for the core of electromagnet. Here we have to describe the reason why the iron is a suitable material for making the core. So, we know that they are making an electromagnet. So, it need to be a magnetic material. And iron is a magnetic material. It can easily be magnetized or demagnetized. Because of these properties, it can be used as a temporary magnetic material. So I write here, iron is a magnetic material. It is a temporary magnetic material. And gets demagnetized easily. Next part B. There is a figure 7.1. 7.1 shows an electromagnet inside a second solenoid wire. So there is a electromagnet that is placed inside the second solenoid wire. You can see here that it is the solenoid X, while this is the solenoid Y, and this one is the electromagnet that is placed inside the solenoid Y. So, part 1. Describe and explain what happened in a solenoid Y when solenoid X is connecting to an alternating current power supply. So, you can see here that there is also a AC power supply, and in this question we have to tell that what happened to the solenoid Y if the alternating power supply is connected with the solenoid X. So, you can see here that it is an AC power supply. So with the solenoid, when this AC power supply is connected with the solenoid X, alternating magnetic field produced in X. Due to this, there is a electromagnetic induction in Y, means that due to the magnetic field in solenoid X, there must be the magnetic field in the solenoid Y because of the electromagnetic induction. As a result, the induced EMF produced in the Y. So I write here alternating magnetic field produced by X when we connect the solenoid X with AC power supply. Solenoid X with AC power supply. This leads electromagnetic induction in Y as a result alternating EMF produced in Y. Part 2. No. A switch and a lamp are connected in series with the terminal of solenoid Y. So, you have to connect a switch and lamp that are in series combination with the terminal of solenoid Y. When the switch is closed, the lamp lights up at a normal brightness. Switch is closed, it means that the lamp is lighting up. Describe and explain what happens to the current in the solenoid X when the switch is closed. We have to explained that when a lamp and switch is connected in series with the terminal of solenoid Y and switch is closed, then what will be the effect on current in solenoid X? So you can see in the circuit. Here is a circuit, and this is the AC power supply. You have to connect it here, switch plus lamp that are in series. So what will happen if we put switch and lamp in series? The current will start to flowing from this AC power supply. So with the lamp switched on, because the current is flowing, and when switch is closed means that the lamp is on, it will require more power in solenoid Y. When the lamp is on and this lamp is in series with this solenoid Y, when it is on, it means that more power will be required in the solenoid Y. So power required in solenoid Y will be larger. So what will happen in the X? We know that P is equal to IV, means that P is directly proportional to I. It means that when power is required larger, then current must be increased. So the current in the X will have to be increased in order to supply the power used in the lamp. So I just write here that the current in solenoid X increases in order to supply the power that is used in the lamp in Y. In solenoid Y. Question number 8. The power supply used in electric vehicle contain 990 rechargeable cells. Each of electromotive force EMF is 1.2. So there are total 990 cells and one cell has EMF 1.2 volt. The cells are contained in packs in which all the cells are in series with each other. The EMF of each pack is 54 volt. Calculate the number of packs in the power supply. Here we have to calculate the total number of packs. So you can see here that for each pack is 54 volt. And one cell EMF is 1.6 volt, 1.2 volt, and one cell is 1.2 volt. So 5.4 divided by 1.2 will be equal to 45. So one pack will be equal to 45 cells. But in the question there are 990 rechargeable cells. So in total we can say that 990 divided by 45 gives 22 packs. It means that with 45 cells you have 22 packs. So the total number of facts will be equal to 22. Part B. When in use, each pack supplies a current of 3.5 ampere. So current is 3.5 ampere. Part 1. Calculate the rate at which each cell is transferring chemical energy to electrical energy. So they are talking to calculate the rate at which energy is transferred. It means that we have to calculate the power because power is equal to the rate of transfer of energy. So I write here P and we have to calculate for each cell, which means that the formula of power is P is equal to IV. Here current is given, that is 3.5 ampere multiplied by. So what is V? Here we have to put for each cell and each cell has EMF 1.2. So I multiply it with 1.2 volt. It comes to be 4.2. The unit of power is watt. So the rate of energy transfer will be equal to 4.2 watt. Moving towards the next part of this question. Part 3. The packs are connected in parallel to supply a large current to drive the electric vehicle. Explain why it is necessary to use the thick wire to carry this current. So, they are using thick wire to carry this current. Why we use the thick wire? We know that R is equal to, the resistance is equal to rho L over A, where rho is resistivity, L is length, and A is area. They are talking about thick wire. So the thick wire is also related with the resistance. The thick wire has smaller resistance because its cross-section area is larger. So when thickness is larger, its resistance will be smaller. It means that for the thick wire, the resistance is smaller. Resistance is small. And for the resistance to be smaller, it carries the large amount of current. And also, there is less resistance, which means that there will be less heat produced in the wire. So there will be less risk of fire or insulation melting. So I write here thick wires have smaller resistance you can see from this formula. It is more efficient in carrying current and less thermal energy is generated here. Which means that there is less amount of heat produced. Here in wires. So there will be less risk of fire or insulation melting. Question number 9, part A. Describe how a digital signal differs from an analog signal. You may draw a diagram. So we have to differentiate between these two signals. First of all, what is meant by a digital signal? So digital signal contains high and low voltage as I am drawing in the figure. On the x-axis I take time and on y-axis I take amplitude. So for digital signal, as it contains high and low voltage, then its shape will be just like this. This is digital signal, while for analogous signal, the shape will be just like this. So this is analog signal and it is digital signal. I write here digital signal contains high and low voltages while analog signal voltage is continuous varying. So you can see from this that here voltage has no specific value. It is varying continuously. So it is analog signal, while this is the digital signal. Here the output, that is voltage, has high and low values. So part B 1. In the appropriate box, draw the symbol for an AND gate and the symbol for an OR gate. Here we have to draw the symbol for AND gate and for OR gate. So we know that symbol for OR and then AND gate is just like this. I use ruler, and for AND gate I just draw a straight line, this one, and it will be just like this. It has two inputs and single output. It is output. It will be equal to, the two inputs are here, So let's suppose it is input A and it is B. For AND gate, output will be equal to A and B. For OR gate, the symbol is just like, so it has single output, while again it has two input. I'm going to mention them. This is input 1 and this is second input. If I represent these inputs with A and B, the output will be equal to A or B. State how the behavior of an AND gate differs from that of the OR gate. So we have to tell the difference between OR gate and AND gate. So in the case of AND gate, the output is high only when both of the inputs are high. So I write here, in AND gate, when both inputs are high, output will be high. But for OR gate, if any one input is high, output will be high. This is the difference between these two. Moving towards the other part of this question. Part C. Here you can see there is a circuit. An arrangement of logic gates A, B and C is shown in figure 9.1. The arrangement has two inputs X and Y and the two outputs P and Q. Here the inputs are X and Y, while the outputs are P and Q. You can see there is a figure 9.1. X is the input, Y is also the input, where P and Q are the outputs. And there are different gates used. We have to mention them. This is NAND gate. A is NAND gate, because you can see a bubble in front of AND gate, and this bubble show that we have apply NOT gate over AND gate. And these two symbols are for NOR gate. It means that we have apply NOT gate over OR gate. This is also for NOR gate. So output P of the logic gate B has logic state 1. So you can see here that B has output 1, that is high. It means that the value of P is equal to 1. I write here P is equal to 1 because the output of B is basically represented by P. So part 1, determine the logic states of the two inputs of the logic gate B. We have to determine the input of B, that is this one and this one. So first of all, we draw the truth table for NAND and NOR gate. So I will draw it. This is for NOR and this is for NAND. So first of all, it is let's suppose the two inputs are represented by D and E. It is 0 0, 0 1, 1 0, 1 1. When I take OR of both these, then I get it is 0 1 1 1. And when I apply NOR, it means that OR gate is A or B. Then NOR gate is basically when I apply NOT gate over it. So here I represent the inputs by D and E. So I write here D and E. R is equal to D R E. So this is OR gate and no, this is NOR gate. The output comes to be, it is 1 0 0 and 0. So you can see that it is for NOT gate, while for NAND gate again consider two inputs D and E, 0 0 0 1 1 0 1 1, and it is AND gate. I apply it is 0 0 0 1, while it is NAND and it will be equal to 1 1 1 0. So it means that AND is equal to D and E, while NAND is equal to D and E, and then I apply NOT over it. These are the truth table. Okay, now let's start to solve this question. The output P, it is equal to 1. You can see here that this is the NOR gate. We see the output of NOR gate. When it is equal to 1, this case when both the inputs are 0, it means that the both inputs are equal to 0. It is equal to 0. Also it is equal to 0. So we have to find out both of these inputs, upper input and lower input, and it comes to be 0 0. It is 0. It is also 0. Moving towards the other part of this question. Determine and explain the logic state of output Q. Here we have to explain the logic state output Q. We have to explain this one. Okay. First of all, you can see here this is the input 0. This is 0. It is the output of this NAND gate, which means that it is equal to 0. And when the output of NAND gate is equal to 0, you can see from here that the NAND gate output must be equal to 0 when both of inputs are high. So this is 1 and it is also equal to 1. It means that X is equal to 1. So from the last question we can see that Y is equal to 0. No, this is 1. This is 1, while the other it is 0. It is 0. So it's a NOR gate, and when inputs are 0 and 1, in the NOR gate when inputs are 0 and 1, output will be equal to 0. So its output must be equal to 0. It means that Q is equal to 0. So I am writing here logic state of Q will be equal to 0. So we also have to explain what we have to do. The two inputs I'm writing two inputs to NAND gate are ones as output is 0. So the lower input to lower NOR gate is 1. The upper input to lower NAND gate is 0. As a result, output Q, it must be equal to 0. So we can see that the logic state of Q is equal to 0. Question number 10. Figure 10.1 represents a neutral atom of an isotopes of element X. This figure shows the neutral atom of an isotope of element X. Part A. State one similarity between this atom and a neutral atom of a different isotope of element X. Here we have to differentiate between the isotope and neutral atom. We don't need to consider this diagram. We know that isotopes are those elements that have same atomic number but different atomic mass. So I write here isotopes have same atomic number but different mass number. Mass number is also be called nuclear number and it is represented by A, where the atomic number is represented by Z. And we also know that the atomic number is equal to number of protons and mass number is equal to number of protons plus number of neutrons. So here you can see that isotopes have same atomic number. It means that the number of protons will be same and different mass number. It means that A will be different. But protons remain the same. That's why neutron will different. We can simply say that isotopes are those elements that have same number of protons but different number of neutrons. Or the isotopes are elements that have same atomic number but different mass number. So I write here, and also for the neutral atom. Neutral atom have equal number of electrons or equal number of protons. So I write here a neutral atom has equal number of electrons or equal number of protons. While for isotopes, number of protons are same. Number of protons are same, but neutrons are different. So, part B. The isotope of element X is radioactive. It is a radioactive isotope. It decays to form an isotopes of element Phi by emitting beta particle. Part 1. Using figure 10.1, deduce the nuclei notation for the isotope of Phi produced by this decay. Here, you have to know what is beta particle. Beta particles are just electrons, and first of all we have to know what is the atomic number and atomic mass of element X. You can see in this figure that the number of protons are 5. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Number of protons are 5 and number of neutrons are 8. When we write the symbol X, it means here we write A and here we write Z, and we know that Z is equal to P, that is number of proton, it will be equal to 5. But A is equal to P plus N, number of protons plus neutrons. It becomes 5 plus 8, it will be equal to 13. So A comes to be 13. I write here X 13 and 5. It is the element X. So here it undergoes beta decay and produce the element Y. Now when it undergoes beta decay, it means that it emits electron. It becomes 0 and 1, minus 1, plus Y is other element that is emitting along with this beta particle. So you can see from here, to balance this equation, it is 0 on the right side while it is 13. So I write here 13 and the atomic number of X is 5. I write here 6. So equation becomes as X 13, 5 gives electron 0 and minus 1 plus Y, that is 6 and 13. So we check the number of protons, we check the atomic number and atomic mass on both sides are equal or not. First of all, we check the atomic number. Here it is 5 and it is 5 is equal to, it is minus 1 and 6, minus 1 plus 6 and it becomes 5. So the atomic number on both sides are same. We also want to check the atomic mass or mass number. It is 13. I write here 13 will be equal to 0 plus 13. It is also be equal to 13. So the atomic number and mass number on both sides are equal. So this element is, I write here the atomic number and mass number of 5 and it comes to be 13 and 6. Next part 3. Next part 2. Beta particles ionize the air. They pass through less strongly than the same number of alpha particles. Suggest why this is so. So we have to tell the reason that why ionization power of beta particles are less as compared to alpha particles. So we know that beta particles are electrons and they have charge of small size. But alpha particles are helium nuclei. I write here beta particles are electrons while alpha particles are helium nuclei. So it is of larger size and it has charge. It has proton too. So, the alpha particle is able to ionize more strongly as compared to beta, and also this makes beta particle to have small mass. Due to which beta particles also have less energy, and it's being light, they travel faster, so there is less time spent near the air molecules. So I write here beta particles have charge of small size. Also, it have smaller mass. Beta particles have less energy. That's why beta particles travel faster and have less time near to air molecules.